what I'd like to do is to welcome our first speakers this morning, who are Robert Walton and Claire Coleman, who are in Melbourne right now. So good afternoon, Robert and Claire, and yeah, welcome to Play On. We're excited to have you with us, and you're going to tell us a bit more about your project, Child of Now. So before I just hand over, another reminder: if you have any questions for the speakers, we'll be glad to answer them afterwards. Please provide them through the feedback system. So welcome, Robert and Claire. Over to you.
Thank you, Ben. Greetings from Australia, and thank you for inviting us to contribute to HOPE2. We deal in hope, and we look forward to sharing some of ours with you today. Today we're proposing a once-in-a-lifetime ritual for the people of Melbourne to speculate about the next century and consciously empathise with future generations who will inherit our society. It's called Child of Now, a utopian project.
We ask people to imagine the next century through the eyes of a child born today. Through Child of Now, a massively co-authored story about the next century and the most ambitious portrait of our population ever created. But before we continue, it's protocol in Aboriginal Australia to introduce ourselves, because where we come from is part of who we are. My name is Claire G Coleman. I'm a Noongar woman, First Nations Australian, born in Perth, about 500 kilometres as the Wadong or crow flies from where the bones of my ancestors lay, in the south coast of the place now called Western Australia. My family have lived in my ancestral country for more than 60,000 years. And I moved to the area in and around Naarm, Melbourne, in 1996. And I am about as far from my ancestral home, as you can see from the maps, as Lisbon is from Belgrade. So Australia is huge, so it's not uncommon for people to be far from their ancestral homes. And to give you a sense of scale of Australia and the number of languages that were here before, spoken before colonisation, we have this map, which shows every coloured patch is a different language of First Nations Australian people. And then also we have one here that zooms in from my country to across to Melbourne. So my country's down the south there and all the way across to Melbourne.
My name is Robert. I'm an immigrant to Australia from the United Kingdom, born in England, but of Welsh, Scottish and Manx ancestry, living and working in Naarm, Melbourne. It's also Australian cultural protocol to explicitly state whose land we gather on in what we call an acknowledgement of country, performed at the start of every talk or event.
Rod and I are connecting to you from the stolen, unceded lands of the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung people of the Kulin nations. We acknowledge the culture elders of the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung people of the past, the elders keeping culture alive in the present. We also give love and acknowledgement to the young ones learning culture to become the elders of the future.
We invite you to think about where you are. Do you live and work on the lands of your ancestors? How do you come to be there? Have you been displaced? Did you or your ancestors displace others or take part in colonisation? Utopias are in tension with colonisation. They are always built on the backs of slaves and the lands of Indigenous people. Race is the child of racism. Race as we know it was developed to determine who, under colonisation, is to be exterminated or displaced and who is to be a slave.
A utopia, if it can ever exist, belongs in the future. This is the important work of speculative fiction, to see the future and from that future to examine the now. We send messages back and forth through time using what anthropologist W.E.H. Stanner in a 1953 essay, The Dreaming, called Everywhen, the Aboriginal Australian concept of time in which the abstract concepts of past, present and future do not exist. In this sense, the future is a utopia. It does not exist. In the everywhen, everything that can exist already does. It's just waiting for its time to unfold or to reveal itself. We don't create a future, we discover it. Child of Now is a way we can encourage this discovery. Australia is seen by many in the world as an almost utopic multicultural society, or as a utopia built by Europeans. But in reality, the nation of Australia, like many others, was built on the theft of land from Indigenous people and on policies of exclusion. To quote award-winning author Behrouz Boochani, a refugee who was detained by the Australian government for 8 years in offshore prison, Australia presents a beautiful and attractive image of itself to the world. But the modern history of Australia is full of puzzles. The more you investigate, the more absorbed you become in its history. My journey educated me in its hidden dark history of prejudice and xenophobia. It's the history written in places like Manus Island and Nauru, and has its roots in its settler colonial origins.
In this talk, we speak from the collaborative creative process of our interdisciplinary extended reality artwork, Child of Now, a project that speculates on radical variations of how the next century might unfold. It focuses collective attention by enacting rehearsals of possible futures. Our aim is to foster embodied experiences of indigenized, equitable and sustainable societies to explore how the future might feel. The artwork does this by combining narrative and portraiture to imagine the life course of a child born today. We invite 14,400 people to step into the Child of Now's shoes at key moments in the future to help make decisions. The sum of all those decisions creates a collaboratively authored future history of the next century. The holograms we create of each person's performance as the Child of Now form an animated portrait that ages sequentially, one body at a time, 1 minute each, through the whole life course. Then, 14,400 minutes later, that's 10 days, the Child of Now will die, approximately 100 years in the future. Now, we appreciate that's a lot to take in, so we'll step through it.
Child of Now is an exercise in co-authorship. It begins with the two of us, Claire and Robert, and will grow and unfold to include thousands more. Our utopian aim is to preserve the idiosyncrasy of each voice, gesture, turn of phrase, body, skin tone, language, and the perspective of every contributor in the Child of Now's future archive. This portrait of the Child of Now, comprised of thousands of people and their observations of the future, will be radically plural. It will not be homogenized as written languages want to do. Specific plurality is important.
For the rest of this talk, we'll give you an overview of the whole project and then go into more detail on the way we make the holographic portraits with audience members. Let's look at this diagram together. The public will engage in the project in two parts. In part one, gathering, which is at the top here, 14,400 Victorians, that's the state we're in, the state of Victoria, would come through our immersive installation to create what we call the Future Archive. This experience includes recording moving holograms and audio messages addressing the future. The gathering, this top part, is what we have been prototyping here at Arts Centre Melbourne. Once we've collected thousands of holograms, we are ready to perform part two, Existence, which is this bottom part. A 10-day public performance ritual. We shuffle the holograms into age order from 1 to 100 and play them 1 minute at a time over 10 days on top of Hamer Hall, the city's largest stage. Each day, this collective portrait ages by a decade. After 10 days, the Child of Now dies in a life-affirming vigil with fireworks and festivities. It
is in this way that the project embodies the art of speculative thinking. generating a portrait of the current population engaged in the act of imagining the next century. A utopian aim is to create a portrait that reflects the diversity of current and future NAM. It is therefore critical to consider who contributes to the archive of portraits to ensure the project captures the diversity of the current population and also reflects our estimation of future population. In 2022, we delivered a prototype immersive XR experience and live recording of holograms.
Here is an overview of the installation. The visitor enters from the street and is welcomed into the waiting room. Here we go, there's the waiting room. This is where it's explained to them that they're about to enter the everywhen, which was the concept we mentioned earlier. They then leave the familiar world and enter the first space alone, the edge of the everywhen. And this is where they encounter the narrator Aim through a multi-channel immersive sound experience. They then enter the everywhen proper by moving down this tunnel and standing on this spot here, where they look at this large curved screen. So that's also here. On this screen, they see the perspective of a giant, 100 meters tall, standing on the banks of the Birrarung River, which is the river that runs through the center of Melbourne. This shows about a 9-minute animation that shows a time lapse of the last 10,000 years of the river and its course and how it's changed, which of course includes the moment of colonization and what's happened to the riverbanks since then. After that experience, we'll talk about this in a little bit more in a few seconds, but after that experience, they move through to room B here, which is where they speak to, in dialogue with the narrator and answer questions as the child of now. Then they move through to room C, which is where they have a VR experience, which we'll tell you about in a second. And then they leave and they have a debriefing moment and then they exit.
We'll now watch a clip from the cinematic animation of 10,000 years of the life of the river displayed on a curved screen. The view on the screen shows a giant perspective stood on the Birrarung River, observing time past from 10,000 years in the past to the near future. At decision points in the story, they encourage them to perform gestures, which are recorded as holograms.
Child of Now lives on the Birrarung, the river of mist that has sustained and been sustained by the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people for so long. It may as well be forever.
10,000 years ago, the river ran through a fertile plain to the sea.
The rock bar holding back the ocean is breaking. The world is about to change.
The plains are flooding with salt water, becoming a mighty bay. Change can come dangerously quickly, and life must find a way to adapt.
Time to act.
You
must
choose.
choose.
Try to stop the water and resist the inevitable.
Or accept the water, adapt, make smart decisions, survive. Perform a gesture to decide.
Move with me.
Or me. Ready? Let's go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
By the end of this 9-minute sequence, the visitor has recorded 6 short holographic clips that glimpse a final dilemma of 2 possible future Melbournes.
Thank you.
You are visiting the future.
Welcome to the future.
2063. Your love
All that of it was not enough. The words were empty.
The actions weak.
The child of now is your age. There.
This is our future. The ancestors are crying.
How you act now impacts future lives. You must choose. To avoid what will happen if we do nothing.
You must turn and face it. Look at what is coming for the child of now.
Or if you want to continue with how things are at the expense of all others, turn towards the future you, and your children will never see.
Turn towards the future.
If you knew you were living in the last days of the human story, what would you do?
How would you act? To save the child of now, face the world we are making.
Hold both of these visions in your heart.
Take a deep breath.
Take a deep breath.
In the next room, the visitors make a series of short voice recordings in role as the child of now and the future.
The visitor is then led to a magic boat room and they enter a VR space via a headset,
Over here.
during which they interact with the archive represented by the river and see the hologram of those of others and hear the responses to the dilemmas
Thank you.
in 3D sound. Here's a short video of the first minute of the VR experience.
Life is a tidal river. Do not fear. You are safe here.
I will let no harm come to you. Remember I told you this was a magical boat?
You can't see much from up here.
Take a deep breath. The life of the child of now flows beneath the surface. This boat was built to take you there. At the river's source, the child is just a baby.
Moments old, but it will age like we all do as time flows into the future.
Let's go a little faster. We have a long life to lead. Hold on!
Hold on!
As an extended reality high-tech project, Child of Now has faced many technical challenges. Here's some of the technologies we're dealing with: immersive sound, volumetric capture, virtual holograms, curved screen projection, apps, virtual reality, whole room control systems that can control all different kinds of media, high-end performance, high-performance computing, high-bandwidth networking, digital archives, and augmented reality. A major challenge was creating and transporting virtual holograms and replaying them in virtual reality immediately after their creation. So there's one way of thinking about the work, which is like a kind of throughput, or like a, we think of it as a technical system as well as an artistic system. And we can answer some questions about that in the Q&A.
In conclusion, the word utopia has long been misunderstood by Western European people. The confusion was caused by the existence of two U sounds in Greek. While we imagine it as meaning a good place, Thomas More, who first used the word, was thinking of the other U sound, and the word actually translates in reality as no place or nowhere. The imagined better place does not ever exist, but perhaps we can create it. The embryonic, almost impossible, large-scale public art project Child of Now will be many things: a sculpture, an experience, a publicly and personally owned massive ethnography, a work of performance art, and archive. We have an impulse towards utopia and a certain knowledge that only through examining the past, the now that has happened, can we prove the future, the now to come. The project itself is utopic by nature, found the belief with enough collaborators the near impossible can be performed. This is the tradition of true utopia, an impulse towards something that might be possible, towards a world that's better than one we live in, towards an ethnography that is decolonized, owned by its subjects, and free of the racist impulses of collecting.
We desire to create a new type of art, knowing it may be impossible and knowing we might change the discourse if we can indeed achieve our aims. In this way, we are defining the artistic impulse as striving towards a place that does not exist, knowing perhaps that it is better than here. Child of Now was born in Melbourne, but it is myriad and pluralistic. So it could be delivered anywhere the human species are found, anywhere people dream, anywhere we can imagine. We are looking for collaborators, new cities, new populations, new children of now. Please get in contact with us if you would like to go with us on this adventure. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much for this presentation, and what a fantastic and inspirational project. So we've had a few questions from the audience. Just to start with, is that number 14,000 people that contribute to this come to this piece? So how do you get those people? Is that by chance? Are they representative of people of your city? How do you engage that many people?
That's a good question. Thank you for it.
Well, for a start, we spent quite some time at the start of the project workshopping how this could be possible, and certainly if we just have an open invitation, we probably would get 14,000 people wanting to be recorded, but that wouldn't be a representative sample. So in order to create a representative sample, we would have to actively seek out people from minority backgrounds who wouldn't normally engage with artistic projects like this. So it would require not only an open call, but a specific and with intent seeking out of people to work on the project or to be recorded. And that's part of the challenge, and that's always been one of the more fun parts of the challenge.
Yeah, we've been working with demographics experts at the University of Melbourne to understand the breakdown of the population as it is, but also because we want to make a portrait of the next century, we need to also understand where the population is going. So we have to oversample certain groups to make sure that the future is more diverse and not less diverse, and includes more people than in certain groups than currently exist in those groups. And that's specific to that breakdown of demographics, and that cultural change is different in every city in the world. Also, Melbourne is very multicultural and multilingual, and we're looking at ways to make the work exist in lots of different languages. And we also work with a group, our focus group called the Future Advisors, who help us think about how to make the project fully accessible to anybody, which means that it has to be completely wheelchair accessible. It has to be accessible to the under 5s as much as the over 95s. And we kind of realized that we're basically making an individual work for each person who comes. It needs to be tailored to whoever arrives. And that opens up a whole new way of thinking about this work. And one of the things Claire and I are really excited about is this idea of tailoring, so that when people glimpse a version of the future, they are kind of gifted a vision of the future that only they ever see. And so they then become the holders of that particular day of the future and need to remember it and advocate for it and tell us the story about it after their experience is over. So the opportunity of radical inclusion actually creates some very interesting aesthetic possibilities for us, which are very exciting.
Very good and very comprehensive answer. I think especially that in speculative projects like this, and you're talking in the presentation when you're leaving behind the familiar and you're entering this kind of new space in the every when. and using all this kind of exotic technology is, how do you bring people like back and remind them that you are talking about the present, and that the entire thing shouldn't be, forgotten as a fantasy, but tied to the real world?
Well, that's a challenge. It's an interesting challenge, but I'm a speculative fiction writer, freelance speculative fiction writer. I was brought in to kind of add my perspective to the project. So what I do with the speculative fiction writing is I bring this sort of thinking to bear with my day job, so to speak. So for me, that sort of challenge is like my bread and butter. I just wake up every morning looking for a challenge like that. So
another thing that happens, which is hard to explain in online, is that the venue that this takes place in has the same view as that big cityscape view. So we do the briefing. We decided actually when we were prototyping to do the briefing on the riverbank overlooking that view of present Melbourne. You then go inside, go into the everyone, have this experience, and then when you exit again, you're seeing the same city there, and all those feelings of connecting to the ancient deep time of a place are brought back up. And it can be quite confronting and a little bit. You become aware of the violence of concrete, right? You become aware of how shocking it is to imagine how this country is underneath this concrete that's been overlaid on it. And so anyway, it's a rare experience to be able to connect to a very long idea of the place in which you live, and also a rare experience for us in Melbourne to see a future representation of our city. Like those kind of futuristic views of cities are reserved for like London and New York or Los Angeles or whatever. It's really important for us to see a future Melbourne in Melbourne.
That's an excellent point. I think, the distribution of the future being unequal, as we know. So on that point, then, is this in collaboration with the city of Melbourne and that organisation? Like, are they supporting this as part of a public project?
So the project has been, the feasibility study for the project was funded by the City of Melbourne and the State of Victoria. Mm-hmm. And this prototype phase is created with Arts Centre Melbourne. It's always been with Arts Centre Melbourne. And the prototype has been funded by the University of Melbourne, which has been focusing on the development of the holographic technologies we need to create in order to make this project work. So we're at the stage now where we're evaluating how the prototypes happened and looking for how to develop it to the next stage, which is to engage the 14,000 or more people here. And then, like we were saying, we're looking to take it to other cities and make different children of now all around the world. And we've often thought about what might happen if the child of now Berlin meets the child of now Melbourne. Would they get on? Probably. But it might be different for some other cities. So there's a kind of demographic project built into this that's very interesting and speaks back to the population in a very unique way, which is really exciting.
Great. So on that point, and in the talk, you did invite a question on the technical aspects. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, the hologram, and what kind of technology you're using to record and render those, especially since you have to do it so quickly?
Well, I just want to start by saying that this project is so speculative that when we started imagining it, what we imagined was not possible yet. So we've actually been in the process of working with people to develop technology that is only in its infancy now and didn't exist when the project started, which is quite interesting for me anyway. But essentially, what we're working on is a complicated form of volumetric scanning, really, but in real time, which is like not really how it's supposed to be used.
So we were thinking. So we've ended up developing a system using Connects, Azure Connects, for the technical people interested, and we have the university's developed a way to stitch multiple point clouds together to create a human being. But the trouble is that's quite a difficult thing to do, and computationally it's very, very expensive and takes a long time. And so creating a system that can create a hologram of somebody, a virtual hologram, that they can then be reviewed in just a few minutes time, is one of the big technical challenges that we've been overcoming. But Claire and I were really keen, and we had to use this technology because the alternative would be something like mocap, with getting people to wear things with dots on. And we just found that technology deeply normative, and it reduces the diversity of human bodies into, pre-existing skeletons and things. So it's completely useless for non-normative bodies, people who use wheelchairs or all kinds of different things. And so the great thing about this technology, but also one of its limitations, is it captures people like a video as they are. So whatever we shoot, that's what we have in the can. We can't reanimate it afterwards, but what it reveals, like we said early on, it captures every idiosyncrasy. It captures skin color, it captures movement, all the ephemeral qualities of a person as they actually are in the world. And that to us was the most important part of this portraiture.
Wow, yeah, again, yeah, super interesting, and another reminder of how how technology is not neutral, and considering the implications of the technology that we use in our productions it is super important. So another question from the audience is about audience response. I think especially young people. So you mentioned the ambition of it opening up from people of age 5 and up. Do you get any kind of feedback about, especially with the more like dystopian elements of some of the visions of the future that you present? Like what kind of responses do you get from people? Like, do people allow their children to come in and see this and see what might be a potentially negative view of the city in the future?
Well, we're very aware of the necessity to tailor the kind of virtual reality for the audience, and also the fact that we're showing someone where in the future versions we intend to actually show people a future that actually would be their age distance in the future, which we probably didn't mention probably before, but each person will be having experienced their age in the future. So if they come here 5 years old, their experience will be 5 years in the future. And anyone who's quite young, the level of dystopia they would be receiving is basically the level of dystopia we live in right now. So they've probably seen it all anyway. And of course we need to tailor everything to the audience. I don't think it's reasonable to expect not to, and that's also part of the writing and development challenge. But I think that certainly people up to a certain age aren't aware of the dystopia we live in. But I think young people in Australia anyway seem more aware of how things are going in our world than some older people are. So I don't think over a certain age, I think people will be quite understanding of the mess we're making of things.
One of the things we're trying to do is to create a space where so the everyone, and the idea of the everyone in the concept for this work, allows us to have a space outside of the everyday world that allows us to sit with the complex, difficult, challenging emotions of the next century, of imagining the next century, which includes obviously traumatic experiences and the potential for climate chaos, ecocide, all those things. But the space itself is very calm and is designed to enable you to sit with these possibilities and to articulate them in your own words. We didn't really talk about the part where the audience members are speaking, but they ask some pretty difficult questions and they have space to answer them. And most of the time, our consciousness of the future is just under the surface of our imaginations. And so this is about surfacing it and creating a safe space, and a brave space, I should say, to engage with these the difficulties. And that can be really emotional and it can be quite traumatic. But it's been affecting people in quite a powerful way. I've spoken to almost every single person who's done it afterwards and do a kind of debrief, and the impact on people is quite intense. And it's sometimes surprising. Yes, it's about the fear of the future, but this connection to the long now and imagining yourself in a much longer history actually has a very powerful effect on people's imagination as well, which can also be hopeful. The reason we show the, sorry, I'm waffling there, but the reason we show the moment of colonization, and we also show this the flooding of Nam 10,000 years ago, is to show the resilience of people to what seems like extinction level events. And again, this is about engaging with, for us, like engaging with First Nations knowledge and discovering actually how do you survive and what is the resilience we can learn from. The other thing we should say is that the aunties, so we have we have two elders who are our mentors in this project, I suppose you could say, or we consulted with them. And they were very clear that we had to show a positive vision of the future as well as a negative vision. So we have to hold, and they literally, lots of the things that they said to us are literally in the work. So they said that we had to hold the utopia and the dystopia in our hearts at the same time. And that is literally a line in the work, which we saw there, where the screen splits into the utopian dystopia.
And then that gives people hope as well. I think if we told people everything's screwed and they're all going to die, they'd probably stop resisting what's happening. But if we told people everything's screwed but you can stop it, then maybe people will do something to stop it. And that's important to me as well.
Yeah, a good way to bring it back to the theme of hope. So, so yeah, final question for you then, before we move on to the next speaker, which is like how to see the project and how to engage with it. So is this currently available in Melbourne if people are in the city? Like, what's the timescale for your plans if you plan to move around different cities, etc.?
Well, you can't see it at the moment, but you can. We are working on a documentary film at the moment, a short documentary. And we'll be regrouping, and we hope to launch the full scale thing in 2025. So it's quite a long-term project, but we can be working with people in parallel on this project if anyone's interested. And the great thing is we've now got the team, we've got the idea, we've got the vision. The final bit is just a couple of $1 million that we need just to take it through. But we're getting there with that as well, which is exciting.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so much. So I know the audience is, there's other questions that I haven't had time to ask, unfortunately. So there's been a real huge interest in the project, and so I know people can find out more about the project. There's links and there's information on the HOPE 2022 pages. So thanks very much, both.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.